We are starting with the second session, which would be taken by Madam Sonia Kinra, faculty member of Chandigarh Judicial Academy, cum Additional District Judge. The session would be moderated by Harshali Chaudhary. I hand over the session to Harshali Chaudhary.
Namaskar. Very good morning to all the learned officers from Punjab, Haryana and UT Chandigarh. We're taking up the second part of our webinar, that is the gender sensitization practices to be followed in court. So this session shall be taken up by Madam Sonia Kinra. Briefly introducing ma'am. Ma'am joined services Punjab Civil Services Judicial Branch in the year 2004. And after having held various posts, she was promoted as additional district and sessions judge in the year 2014. She also held a POCSO court and a court with regard to crime against women. She has a keen interest in the said topic, and we couldn't find a better speaker than her to sensitize us on the practices which are to be followed in the court with regard to such a sensitive topic, that is gender. This session would be in a question answer form. We have formulated certain questions taking into consideration the practical issues that we face. And I shall be putting up those questions to ma'am, and ma'am shall be answering them according to the provisions of law as well as the case law. As usual, the chat box is open, and the attendees are welcome to put their question in the chat box, and after ma'am completes her detailing, we shall be taking up the questions, and also if the time permits us. So starting with the session, I welcome ma'am, and the first question that comes into my mind with regard to gender sensitization is that there are no doubt numerous constitutional provisions and special legislation for protection of rights of women. But now the question is that whether all the provisions in our constitution have been able to stop the crime against women. So ma'am, can you please answer this question?
Good morning, Honorable Mr. Justice Arun Monga, Learned Director Academies, respected district and session judges of the states of Punjab and Haryana and UT Chandigarh, and my dear colleagues. So as we were going to have constitutional aspect first, but due to technical latches, there is the practices to be followed in court. It has to be conducted first. So before answering this question, I would like to refer some constitutional provisions in broad, as it will be taken by Honorable Justice Arun Monga after this. These are the Article 14, which guarantees that the state shall not deny equality before the law and equal protection of laws. Article 15, which prohibits discrimination against any citizen on the ground of sex. Article 15, Clause 3, which empowers the state to make positive discrimination in favor of women and children. Article 16 provides for equality of opportunity in matters of public employment. Article 23, which prohibits trafficking in human beings and forced labor. Article 39, Clauses A and D enjoins the state to provide equal means of livelihood and equal pay for equal work. Article 42 enjoins upon the state to make provisions for securing justice and humane conditions of work, and even for maternity relief. Article 51, capital A, Clause E imposes a fundamental duty on every citizen to renounce the practices derogatory to the dignity of women. Apart from these, there are many special social legislations. But despite of all these, the data of the NCRB, which was published in the newspaper Hindu recently, just show how there is steep increase in the crime since the year 2015. You can see this on your screen, and thereafter this is the cases which have increased in the domestic violence. This is the data since the year 2010 till 2020. So it is explicit from this data that the crime against women has not been curbed with heavy hands, despite the constitutional and other social legislations framed especially for women. So there is need of art for gender sensitization, and that is why we are here today.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question that we have, that we are now talking about gender sensitization. So what exactly gender sensitization is? The next question would be why it is required. And the connected question would be what is exactly gender stereotype? Can you please enlighten us on that?
Yes, to understand the connotation of gender sensitization, first we have to look into the difference between the terms sex and gender. Here is on your screen. Sex is the label assigned at birth based on the reproductive organs an individual is born with, whereas the gender is one's perception of portraying oneself in front of the society. So gender is a social construct which is based on society's beliefs and values. And these are the examples on both the sides. Now, what is the reason for gender injustice? It can be attributed to unequal power and equation in gender relations. There are many factors like patriarchal society, which considers women household work as economically insignificant, preference of male child in society, and so on. So gender refers to the learned roles, norms, and expectations on the basis of one's sex. It is only a social construct and even differs between the cultures and within the cultures. And now, to define the term gender stereotype, I would like to share a video to enjoy the topic and to have good understanding of expression gender stereotype. Just have a look on this small video.
Created using Powtoon.
So I think it would have been quite clear. The gender stereotype is a generalized view or preconception about attributes or characteristics or the roles that are ought to be possessed by or performed by women and men. Thus, the behavior that is expected by society from a particular gender is known as gender stereotype. For example, caring and nurturing of kids is the responsibility of women. Women cannot cry. Women cannot carry heavy loads. Men cannot cry. Women are scared of working outside their homes at night, and so on. So now comes the term gender sensitization. What does gender sensitization refer to? It refers to the modification of behavior, this behavior, and that can be modified by raising awareness of gender equality concerns. It is about changing behavior and instilling empathy into the views that we hold about our own and the other gender. It helps people in examining their personal attitudes and beliefs and questioning the realities they thought they know. Gender sensitivity is not about pitting women against men. Honorable Mr. Justice R.C. Lahoti, in one of his articles, has coined a term gender harmony for gender justice. As from gender justice, it suggests a clash between male and female in society. So, gender sensitivity helps to generate respect for the individual regardless of sex. It helps them determine such assumptions in matters of gender are valid and which are stereotype generalizations. It requires not only intellectual effort, but also sensitivity and open-mindedness. It opens up the widest possible range of life options, not only for men, but both for women and men. So the struggle for gender justice is not now, but for what stress is being laid now is the sensitization, awareness on gender justice. And this is gender sensitization.
All right, ma'am. So now let's come to our own profession, the profession of judiciary. And now the question arises as that is there any need of gender sensitization to our judicial officers? And if yes, what is the need of gender sensitization to our judicial officers who are already disposing of the cases with regard to crime against women?
Yes, it is need. Indeed, there is a need. As you must have noticed that while reading the Constitution provisions, I laid stress on Article 51, capital A, Clause E. It imposes a fundamental duty on every citizen to renounce the practices derogatory to the dignity of women and judges, while sitting in the courtroom are bound to perform this duty. So it is necessary to sensitize the judges on this problem, to help in drawing up a judicial code of conduct, to create a more gender neutral atmosphere, not only to women judges, but also to women lawyers, women litigants, women witnesses, and women employees of the courts. The court should also be sensitive towards the lady advocates, which includes the lady public prosecutors appearing in the courtroom. The presiding officers should adopt gender neutral language, renounce double standards, and respect dignity of a woman. So the courts therefore shoulder a great responsibility while trying an accused on charges of rape and sexual harassment. They must deal with these cases with utmost sensitivity. The court should examine the broader probabilities of a case and not get swayed by minor contradictions or insignificant discrepancies in the statement of the prosecutrix. There is plethora of case laws on this point where the Honorable Apex Court has held that witness is not an accomplice and therefore her testimony does not require any corroboration. The only proviso is that it is cogent and reliable. So these are the case laws from which I gain support. Suresh Chand, Vijay Ilyas Chini, Rajinder Ilyas Raju, Mohammad Imran, State of Maharashtra versus Chandra Prakash Keval Chand Jain. Honorable Apex Court has held in these cases that it is a trite law that a woman who is the victim of sexual assault is not an accomplice to the crime but is a victim of another person's lust. And we must remember this thing. The prosecutrix stands at a higher pedestal than an injured witness, as she even suffers from emotional injury. Therefore, her evidence need not be tested with the same amount of suspicion as that of an accomplice. Even it is nowhere in the Indian Evidence Act that evidence of prosecutrix or victim cannot be accepted unless it is corroborated in material particulars. She is a competent witness under Section 118 of the Evidence Act, and her evidence must receive the same weight as is attached to an injured in case of physical violence. And the same degree of care and caution must attach in evaluation of her evidence as in the case of an complainant, injured, or not more than that. So if the courts keep this in mind and feel satisfied that the statement of the prosecutrix is reliable, cogent, and they can rely upon the same, then there is no rule of law in the Evidence Act similar to illustration B to Section 114, which requires it to look for corroboration. So in the totality of circumstances appearing on the record of case, if the prosecutrix does not have a strong motive to falsely involve the person charged, the court should ordinarily have no hesitation in accepting her evidence. And the courts must be alive to the responsibility and sensitive while dealing in cases involving sexual molestations.
Okay, ma'am. Now, the next question that I have in my mind is with regard to what precautions the court has to take, or the officers, how aware the officer should remain during cross-examination of the victims of rape and in case of sexual harassment.
Okay. These days, a lot of criticism has been there of the treatment of the victims of sexual assault in the courts during their cross-examination. Notwithstanding the provision of Evidence Act regarding relevancy of facts, all of us have seen, said that some defense counsels adopt the strategy of continual questioning the prosecutrix as to the rape. The victim is required to repeat again and again the details of rape incident. It is not to bring out the fact on record, but to test her story for inconsistencies with a view to attempt to twist the interpretation of events given by her so as to make them appear inconsistent with her allegations. The courts, therefore, should not sit as a silent spectator while the victim of crime is being cross-examined by the defense. They must watch that the victim is not being re-victimized. The courts must also ensure that cross-examination is not made a means of harassment or causing humiliation to the victim of crime. Even in the cases of POCSO, the procedure has been prescribed under Section 33 of the POCSO Act for examining the victim. And what precautions can we take? That is, the proceedings in such like cases shall be conducted in camera. In case of the child victim, the questions of the examination in chief and cross-examination should not be put directly, either by the SPP, Special Public Prosecutor, or the defense, but they should be routed through the presiding officer. The special court, if examining the child witness, may permit frequent breaks for the child and even can offer the refreshments. The court who is dealing in the recording of the evidence of the child witness has to create child-friendly atmosphere. And if it is under the POCSO Act, then the person in whom the witness, the victim has trust, has to be made sit in the courtroom. It may be any of the parents or any relative or any friend. The special courts shall also ensure that the child is not called repeatedly to testify in the court. On this aspect, I will refer to the latest case of Siva Kumar, which is of 2021, wherein Honorable Kerala High Court has rejected the application under Section 311 CRPC for recalling the child witness. In this case, after recording the evidence of the child witness, the case was posted for recording of the testimonies of other witnesses, and in the meantime, the application under Section 311 CRPC was filed by the defense counsel on the ground that he could not put certain contradictions and omissions to the witness and mark the same while examining the witness, as he was in haste in connection with another case. So while discussing the law on 311 CRPC and referring to provision under Section 33 subsection 5 of the POCSO Act, it has been observed that the special court shall ensure that the child is not repeatedly called to testify. As far as possible, the evidence of the child has to be completed on the same day. Recalling the child who has faced the trauma in an alleged incident as well as the fire of cross-examination before the court due to omission on the part of the counsel could not be justified to recall the witness. And we must take care and keep in mind the trauma which the child witness has undergone. And the courts must help, protect and assist the child for coming out of that trauma, because otherwise it is very difficult. Psychological stress is there. The child cannot act properly in the routine manner and he has some stress on his mind. So his growth stops there. So this thing shall be kept in mind while dealing with these cases. And the aggressive or the character assassination questions should not be allowed. Even for the child witness, the special courts can keep toys, dolls, coloring material to make the child comfortable and even enable the child to describe properly on which part of the body sexual offense was committed. Even the identity of the prosecutrix or witness should not be disclosed at the time during the course of investigation or trial. And it has been even made punitive by way of Section 228 capital A IPC. Next, the court must be sensitive with regard to payment of the interim compensation. It is very much necessary for the medical and immediate rehabilitation of the prosecutrix or the victim. And it has to be granted as per the compensation scheme for women, victims, survivors of sexual assault, other crimes, 2018. And even thereafter, while disposing of the case finally. So if sometimes the courts do not act at the proper time, the object of such policies and schemes is frustrated. For example, in the case of incest abuse, sometimes the allegations are against the father of the victim only. Now, if the father, who is only bread earner, is behind the bars and there is nobody to feed the family, the witness succumb to the family pressure. If she is not provided with the proper care, she is not provided support person, compensation, and even the shelter. And in order to avoid these things, what can be done that we should call, the special courts should call these special reports. It is provided in the POCSO Act only. The The special reports should be sent to these special courts, and so that the special court should come to know that such and such FIR has been registered, and in which the suo motu action of the court may be required for awarding compensation. That is entire. And even the track of victims can be there, whether they have been provided with other medical aid and other assistance which should be there. So this is with regard to what we can do while cross-examining the witness.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, the next question that arises is whether gender stereotype phases can be used by the officers during holding of the court, or in the judgments, or in the orders.
There are many judgments issuing directions to avoid the use of gender stereotypes in the judgments and orders. In the case of Secretary, Ministry of Defense versus Babita Punia, the case where women army officers have been given permanent commission, it has been observed that submissions of Union of India are based on sex stereotypes, which are premised on the assumptions about socially ascribed roles to the woman, which discriminate women. These gender stereotypes are like greater challenge for women officers to meet the hazards of the service owing to their prolonged absence during pregnancy, motherhood, and domestic obligation towards their children and family. So it was observed that it is a strong stereotype which assumes that the domestic obligation rests solely on women. If society holds strong beliefs about gender role, that men are socially dominant, physically powerful, and breadwinner of the family, and women are weak and physically submissive and primarily caretaker, confined to domestic environment, it is unlikely that there would be a change in mindsets. Next is the case Rakesh V versus State of Karnataka. In this case, what happened? Honorable Karnataka High Court, while granting the bail to an accused, stated that there is nothing mentioned by the complainant as to why she went to her office at night, that is at 11 p.m. She is also not subjected to consuming drinks with the petitioner and allowing him to stay with her till morning. The explanation offered by the complainant that after the perpetration of the act she was tired and fell asleep is unbecoming of an Indian woman. That is not the way our women react when they are ravished. But our honorable Supreme Court, in the latest case in which the directions have been issued to conduct the workshops and to sensitize the judicial officers regarding the gender sensitization for which we are here, is the case of Aparna Bhatt and others versus State of Madhya Pradesh. Here, it has been observed by Honorable Apex Court that judicial stereotyping refers to practice of judges ascribing to an individual specific attributes, characteristics, or roles by reason only of her or his membership in a particular social group. Therefore, it is held that the use of reasoning or language which diminishes the offenses and tends to trivialize the survivor is especially to be avoided under all circumstances. Thus, to say that the survivor had in the past consented to such or similar acts, or that she behaved promiscuously, or by her acts or clothing provoked the alleged action, that she behaved in a manner unbecoming of chaste or Indian woman, etc., should be avoided. And these are the particular gender stereotypes which have been mentioned in the judgment that the courts should desist from expressing any such stereotype opinion. These are: women are physically weak and need protection. Women are incapable of or cannot take decisions on their own. Men are the head of the household and should take all the decisions relating to family. Women should be submissive and obedient according to our culture. Good women are sexually chaste. Motherhood is the duty of and role of every woman, and assumptions to the effect that she wants to be a mother. Women should be the ones in charge of their children, their upbringing and care. Being alone at night or wearing certain clothes make women responsible for being attacked. A woman consuming alcohol, smoking, etc. may justify unwelcome advances by men or has asked for it. Women are emotional and often overreact or dramatize events. Hence, it is necessary to corroborate their testimony. Testimonial evidence provided by women who are sexually active may be suspected when assessing consent in sexual offense cases, and lack of evidence of physical harm in sexual offense case leads to an inference of consent by the woman. So these are the gender stereotype opinions which have been mentioned in the judgment, and stress that these should not be written in the judgments and they should not be basis of the reasoning. So we should avoid these gender stereotypes.
Okay, ma'am. So it means that we, the judges, when we are sitting on the dais, we should not have a certain opinion about the gender when we are dealing with such cases, especially the cases relating to sexual offences against women or the POCSO. I think Aparna Bhatt judgment is very clear on that aspect. But ma'am, another question that is that often comes is that especially in cases of sexual offences, can such cases be sent for mediation, and can the bail be granted to the accused on the basis of the compromise reached between the victim and the accused? So ma'am, kindly enlighten us on this aspect also.
In this aspect, Honorable Apex Court and Honorable High Courts have again and again stated that the compromise should not be promoted by the court in the cases of heinous crime against women, and even such accused are not entitled to bail on the ground of compromise. However, there are cases, if we go through them, where the bails have been granted on the ground that prosecutrix and accused intend to marry. But there is the case of State of MP versus Madan Lal, wherein Honorable Apex Court has held that in cases of sexual offences, the concept of compromise, especially in the form of marriage between the accused and the prosecutrix, shall not be thought of, as any such attempt would be offensive to the woman's dignity. These are crimes against the body of a woman, which is her own temple. These are offenses which suffocate the breath of life and sully their reputation. So dignity of a woman is a part of her non-perishable and immortal self, and no one should ever think of painting it in clay. There cannot be a compromise or settlement, as it would be against her honor, which matters the most. It has been even held to the extent that if the perpetrator has acceded to enter into wedlock with her, it is nothing putting pressure in an adroit manner, in a clever manner, in a skillful manner. So it has been emphasized that the courts are to remain absolutely away from this subterfuge to adopt a soft approach. Again, there is a case of Ramphal versus State of Haryana. Honorable Apex Court took note of the compromise between the survivor and accused persons, but found that such compromise is of no relevance when deciding the case of rape and cases of sexual assault. And the conviction granted by trial court and Honorable High Court was upheld. However, the sentence was little bit reduced, but the compensation amount was enhanced. Again, there is a case of Sunil Raikwad. In this, the petition under section 482 CRPC was filed for quashing an FIR under section 377, read with section 4 of the POCSO Act. And again, the ground was that compromise has been entered between the parties. Even the affidavit of the complainant, who was father of the victim, was filed, but it was not allowed, and it was held that FIR of non-compoundable offences cannot be mechanically quashed just because the parties have decided to bury their hatchets. Again, in this aspect comes the case of Aparna Bhatt. Now, at this stage, I would like to narrate the facts in summary. What happened that on 20th of April 2020 at 2:30 a.m., the accused, who was neighbor of the complainant, entered the house, caught hold of the hand of the complainant, and attempted to harass her sexually. FIR was registered under sections 452, 354A, 323, and 506 of IPC. The case was investigated and charge sheet was filed. However, the accused moved an application for anticipatory bail, and Honorable High Court of Madhya Pradesh, while impugned judgment, while granting bail, imposed the condition that the applicant, along with his wife, shall visit the house of the complainant with Rakhi thread on Rakhi Day with a box of sweets and request the complainant to tie the Rakhi band to him, with the promise to protect her to the best of his ability for all times to come. Even it was directed that he shall also tender rupees 11,000 to the complainant as a customary ritual, which is offered by brothers to the sisters on such occasion. The applicant shall also tender rupees 5,000 to the son of the complainant, and thereafter he shall obtain photographs and receipts of payment made to the complainant and her son, and file the same on the record of the case before the registry. Honorable Supreme Court took very serious notice of this and observed that using Rakhi tying as a condition for bail transforms a molester into a brother, and that too by a judicial mandate, which is wholly unacceptable and has the effect of diluting and eroding the offense of sexual harassment. The act perpetrated on the survivor constitutes an offense in law and is not a minor transgression that can be remedied by way of an apology, rendering community service, tying a Rakhi, or presenting a gift to the survivor, or even promising to marry her. The law criminalizes outraging the modesty of a woman, so granting bail subject to such conditions renders the court susceptible to the charge of renegotiating and mediating justice between confronting parties in a criminal offense. And these are the directions which have been issued with regard to the bail matters. While dealing in the bail matters, I would like to read for you. Bail conditions should not mandate, require, or permit contact between the accused and the victim. Such conditions should seek to protect the complainant from any further harassment by the accused. Where circumstances exist for the court to believe that there might be a potential threat of harassment of the victim, or upon apprehension expressed after calling for reports from the police, the nature of protection shall be separately considered. An appropriate order made in addition to a direction to the accused not to make any contact with the victim. In all cases where bail is granted, the complainant should immediately be informed that the accused has been granted bail and copy of the bail order made over to him or her within 2 days. Bail conditions and orders should avoid reflecting stereotypical or patriarchal notions about women and their place in society, and must strictly be in accordance with the requirements of the CRPC. In other words, discussion about the dress, behavior, or past conduct or morals of the prosecutrix should not enter the verdict granting bail. The courts, while adjudicating cases involving gender-related crimes, should not suggest or entertain any notions or encourage any steps towards compromises between the prosecutrix and the accused to get married, suggest or mandate mediation between the accused and the survivor, or any form of compromise as it is beyond their powers and jurisdiction. Sensitivity should be displayed at all times by judges, who should ensure that there is no traumatization of the prosecutrix during the proceedings or anything said during the arguments. And lastly, judges especially should not use any words, either spoken or written, that would undermine or shake the confidence of the survivor in the fairness or impartiality of the court. So these guidelines have been issued by Honorable Apex Court with regard to the bail matters, and even avoiding the use of gender stereotypes as we have discussed earlier. And we should take care while deciding the cases and while conducting the proceedings in the court.
Yes, ma'am. So we were talking about the genders, and now there's a third gender also that we should know of and we should be aware of, is that of transgenders. So ma'am, can you please enlighten us as to how can we sensitize ourselves with regard to transgenders?
In order to be sensitized regarding people belonging to the trans community, one needs to understand the word transgender, which is also called third gender, trans, or T-gender, whatever you may call it. It is built up with the fusion of two words, trans plus gender. Trans is a person who is assigned certain sex just by looking at the genitalia at the time of birth. But at a later stage in life, they feel as belonging to the opposite gender. So it simply is a person whose gender identity assigned at birth does not match the gender identity at present. That is why transgender. So it is an umbrella term which is used for people whose gender identity differs from what is typically associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. In India, they are commonly referred to as hijras or kinnars, and they are the ones most known to the general public since they are called on auspicious ceremonies like at the time of the birth of the male child or marriage of a boy. I would also like to refer to the gender identity and sexual orientation on this aspect. Gender identity is an individual's perception of one's own gender. It's only about oneself. And sexual orientation is an individual's own sexual preferences to what he or she is attracted. So gender identity includes the concept of personal pronouns like he, she, ze, zir, it, they, etc. And sexual orientation does not include the concept of personal pronouns. Gender identity includes the suffixes Miss, Mrs, Maxine, Mr, etc. Whereas it is not so in the sexual orientation. Examples are man, woman, genderqueer, trans, etc. And in this case, the examples are lesbians, gays, bisexual. I must refer here that earlier homosexuality was considered as mental disorder, but now it is not so under the Mental Health Care Act of 2017, which is based on the international norms. So transgender people often experience great difficulty in living as they affirm gender and learning to be comfortable with their own expression of gender. One should always avoid assumptions and stereotypes about a person's sexual orientation or gender identity and use conducive language. If you are unsure of how they like to be addressed or what words they are comfortable with, just ask politely that what are their preferred personal pronouns. Therefore, one should always ask from their personal pronouns as to what they should like to be preferred to call, as instead of just assuming by how they dress up. So if we are sensitized towards these pronouns, only then we can respect them. Maybe they are our colleagues or they are as appearing as witnesses or the court staff. And now the judgments of the Nalsa, Navtej Singh Johar, they have been granted the human rights and even the provision of section 377 IPC qua them is not criminalized. This act between the consensual parties is not criminalized. So this was all about the transgenders. And Harshali, do you have any other question?
Ma'am, I believe the questions that I had framed, I think you have answered all very well, but I still have a couple of questions that I would like to ask you. That
Yes.
like when you said that we cannot recall, we should not recall the child witness repeatedly for especially in the offenses, sexual offenses. So now, is it a mandatory condition that we cannot recall the child witness under any circumstance?
No, it is not mandatory. As we all know, every case is different and unique in itself. So it depends upon case to case. But as per section 33 subsection 5 of the POCSO Act, it has been statute that the evidence of the child witness should be completed on that day only, and he should not be called again and again. And the object of this act is such framed is that, and the procedure aspect which is framed, it is on that the child should come out at the earliest from the trauma. So this is the latest case law which has been there, which has rejected the application under section 311 CRPC. But according to our wisdom, we have to look into the case to case whether it is really expedient to recall the witness.
All right. Ma'am, another question is that in case of interim compensation, when we were talking about the interim compensation, so far the crime against child victim is concerned or a victim is concerned, can the interim compensation is to be made only on the application by the victim only?
No, it is not necessary that it should be granted on the application of the complainant or the victim. The court in which the case is pending or the special courts which are dealing with the crimes, heinous crimes against women and the POCSO cases, they can take suo motu action when they come to when it is in their notice that such and such case has been registered and the victim really needs the assistance. Yes, Harshali?
You also told us, ma'am, that the identity of the victim cannot be disclosed.
Yes.
Is there something that the identity of the witness cannot be disclosed at any stage or at any cost during the course of a trial or later on also?
It is in the provision itself that it can be disclosed when the court thinks it apt. The conditions are like that if any child or any prosecutrix whose modesty has been outraged, who has been sexually molested, or she is not in the senses, or she is not in the conscious state of mind, is found, then in order to trace her parentage in her family, we have to seek an order from the court to maybe to circulate the photograph or any other by which her identity can be fixed. So it depends upon the circumstances.
And another question that I have in my mind is that if gender stereotype women should be the ones in charge of their children, their upbringing and care, if the such words they are not to be used, then what about the custody cases under the Guardianship Act?
No, this is the gender stereotype is different from the custody matters. Now, gender stereotype, which has been stated in the Aparna Bhatt case, as it is by the Honorable Supreme Court, it is even for the Honorable High Courts. And I have told you that there are a number of cases where such as thing has been held and thereafter the benefit has been given to the accused. And therefore, the custody matters, they have to be dealt as per the statute. So that's the different thing.
So we cannot compare both the aspects.
Yes.
Okay. So, ma'am, due to paucity of time, we will not be able to take up more questions. And now this brings an end to our first session.
Arshad, I would like to quote here at the end, the quote of the Shakespeare.
Please, ma'am.
Yeah, it's the Shakespeare through one of his characters in a play. That what is in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So it conveys that what really matters is the essential qualities of the substance and the fundamental characteristics of an entity, but the name by which it or person is called does not matter. So with this, I end here. Thank you.
Very, very aptly put, ma'am. And what could have been a better way to conclude our first session? And I thank you very much, ma'am, for enlightening us on the procedural aspects so far gender sensitization is concerned. And I hope that it is going to help our learned judicial officers in dealing such kind of cases. Thank you very much, ma'am.